I would like to thank AGHS for giving me the incredible honour of addressing you today as a visitor to Pakistan and as a guest in your country. This is my third visit. On a past occasion when I was here, I travelled from Islamabad to Gilgit and up through the Hunza Valley, one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen. This time, I have learned that this truly is a very beautiful city and that Lahore is a place of great architecture, great culture, and great food. This trip, however, involves work as well as pleasure. The pleasure has come from learning more about Asma and her tremendous legacy that lives and breathes through the work done daily by Nida Ali and all the other incredible people who keep Asma's spirit alive in maintaining the program of help that she gave to those who need that help most. My first visit to the centre and meeting some of the people who work there has been an illustration of the true meaning of community and charity. The centre is a community that's demonstrated in its shared sense of purpose, its shared values, and the shared spirit that drives it on. Seeing that community working within the wider community was not just a privilege, slightly humbling, but it was also a great pleasure. But the work part of the trip is my focus today, and the topic of my speech to you is charity, community, and legal assistance. Why do people need legal assistance? Why should we, those of us who are lawyers, offer that legal assistance? Why should all of us, as members of society, offer that legal assistance? How does the assistance we provide to the members of our community who need our help most increase the strength of the whole community? Firstly, why should we as lawyers strive to ensure that legal assistance is available to those who need it? Well, my starting point is the rule of law. Why? Because underpinning our approach to legal assistance is the way in which we understand and approach the rule of law. This is something in which we must all take an active role. Ignorance of the importance of the rule of law is the greatest threat to our approach and recognition of the importance of legal assistance. So, do we know what we mean by the term rule of law? In starting to write this speech, I read part of the Constitution of Pakistan. There are obvious and significant similarities between our two countries. Although we don't have a written constitution like yours, we have the same principles. We see, by looking at Magna Carta and the common law that it articulated and continues to underpin today, how much we have in common. We see the resonance between your constitution and our unwritten constitution. Magna Carta was a concession made by a weak and unpleasant king to the feudal lords of the time to protect them and their lands, but by accident set some of the precedents which have guided our constitutional principles ever since. Your constitution was drafted by some of the best lawyers in the world, who set out to define a new country and how its people could look to their government to protect their fundamental rights and freedoms. One of the main clauses of Magna Carta that survives is Clause 39, and it says, "No person shall be arrested or imprisoned or stripped of his possessions except by the judgment of his equals or by the law of the land." It's funny how all these documents say his, not hers. Chapter 1 of the Constitution of Pakistan deals with fundamental rights, and it sets out at Article 9, no person shall be deprived of life, or liberty, save in accordance with the law. And so you see the same core values run through our DNA, ours and yours. We both value the principles that all are equal before the law, that the judiciary is totally independent of the executive, that we all have a right to a fair trial and due process in reasonable time and at a reasonable cost, that we should be able to have access to legal representation of the highest quality and of sound ethical standards. So how do judges and lawyers play their parts in explaining and fulfilling the obligations of the rule of law? But first, by demanding the highest ethical standards of lawyers and judges, by practicing and encouraging advocacy of the highest standards, by training and assisting lawyers to have the skills and abilities to be good advocates. We also play our part by treating everyone else in the process with respect, and whilst fighting hard to win, always fighting within the rules. By having confidence that judges and practitioners will work together to improve the system and to make it better. Public confidence has to be earned and maintained. Those involved in the legal process have a duty to ensure that the system is transparent and is seen to work in the public interest. Now, we can only gain and maintain public confidence by ensuring that all are equal before the law in a real sense. In other words, by ensuring that everyone has access to the law to defend or pursue their rights. So to work well, the rule of law requires of any system that all are treated fairly and equally, that judicial decisions are fair and open, that they are reached by impartial and well-informed judges acting with integrity, that the judges are independent of the executive, that arguments are heard, considered, and decisions delivered within a reasonable time and at a reasonable cost to the parties or to the public, that the system has the confidence of the people, that those conditions will be met, and that if a decision is wrong or flawed, there is a good process for review or appeal. The rule of law is a phrase that people use all the time. Lawyers, politicians, journalists, judges. But very simply, it means that we are all ruled by the law. And so everyone, irrespective of wealth, gender, or faith, is ruled by the same law that rules us, our politicians, our judges, and anybody else in a position of power. So I repeat, we are all equal before the law. To be so, the law must not only apply equally, but as Lord Bingham once said, it must be accessible, intelligible, clear, and predictable. And there are a number of people here and in the UK who need our help to understand the law, to see how it affects them, to see how it can work for them, to enforce and ensure their rights. Well, that's the theory, but how do you put it into effect? How do we translate our understanding of the term into everyday practice? How does a society play a proper part in ensuring that anyone who needs assistance and cannot afford it can be helped? How do we do that knowing what lawyers do? How do we do that knowing what members of society can do? Well, simply put, by making sure there is some form of assistance for those who need it, by ensuring that there is some form of legal aid, by ensuring that paralegals are enabled to help those who need help that they cannot obtain by payment. The health of any society can be gauged by its justice system. How do we treat the worst among us? How do we treat those we accuse and convict of crime? How do we treat the victims of crime, the witnesses to crime? How do we repay the trust that society places in us? How do we treat the dispossessed, the most vulnerable, the most needy? How do we enable members of our societies to know what their rights are, to know how to enforce them, and to have the means of enforcing them? We must strive to ensure that the public understands the vital importance of the rule of law to them as individuals, and to their communities, and to their nations. In this, I think we all, especially in England, can learn more from Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He was, of course, not only an eminent barrister, called to the bar by Lincoln's Inn at what must have seemed at the time, and certainly would today, to be the impossibly young age of 19. From the age of 20, he was practicing in the Bombay High Court, the only Muslim in practice there at the time, so a faith minority. From there, he not only developed a successful legal career, but an even more successful political career. As one of his biographers said, "Few individuals significantly alter the course of history. Fewer still modify the map of the world. Hardly anyone can be credited with creating a nation state. Muhammad Ali Jinnah did all three." As a 19-year-old immigrant in London, he would no doubt have thought achieving any one of those things impossible. But his ability, developed as an advocate, to see round corners, as somebody once said of him, helping him to anticipate obstacles, to devise and propose solutions to them, and to secure their acceptance through the power of persuasion. The art of advocacy, persuading people to do what is right. Those who support the promotion of legal assistance for those who cannot afford to instruct lawyers can draw inspiration from his approach. By understanding the obstacles that stand in the path of establishing an effective and comprehensive system to provide such assistance to those in need, and by considering how best to overcome them, and to set out to persuade those with the power to create the necessary changes to give life to the solutions that you devise. In taking these steps, we can draw on past experience. The challenge of securing legal assistance is all too unfortunately not a new one. So what might your great Muhammad Ali Jinnah have suggested? Well, he would have drawn on Islamic teaching, combined with his knowledge of the common law, legal history. In the first instance, he may well have reminded himself of the teaching of the 36th Hadith. It emphasizes the role of charity and support for others in the Islamic tradition. If I may quote its opening lines in English, it reads as follows: "Whosoever removes a worldly grief from a believer, Allah will remove from him one of the grievances of the Day of Judgment. Whosoever alleviates the needs of a needy person, Allah will alleviate his needs in this world and the next." At its heart, it emphasizes the fundamental importance of charity, of helping others, of helping our neighbors, and that this ought to be at the heart of any and every society. It's also found throughout the Old and New Testaments. It underpins the parable of the Good Samaritan, the man who stopped to help the injured person on the road when others had passed by. And from that parable, the question, "Who is my neighbor?" has been taken. So both traditions would have been well known to Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Just as with our country's constitutions, we live by the same principle, that of charity, of community. Just as they underpin our social and religious heritage, they underpin the common law, again, which we share. Those shared principles, shared values, underpin the commitment found in our legal professions to provide help and support for the most vulnerable in society. In England and Wales, with the decline in legal aid provision over the last 20 years, and in particular since its sharp reduction in scope since 2013, those shared values have taken on an increasing amount of importance. For the legal profession at home, those values have taken shape in a number of initiatives. They have seen the development of various schemes within the courts through which lawyers provide pro bono legal advice and representation for individuals without financial means. I'm just going to deal with a few, and I say with all national pride but humility, I'm not sure any of them could beat the legal aid cell that we're here to commemorate and respect today. But we have the pro bono unit set up by our Bar Council. It matches willing lawyers to cases. Barristers of all ages join up and they do the occasional case for nothing. We have individual schemes, for example, in the Chancery Division, where young lawyers often find it very difficult to gain experience of advocacy, but actually make quite good livings. We have a scheme called CLIPS, Chancery Litigant in Person scheme. Young lawyers go onto a rota, and once every few months they attend court and spend the day advising and acting for litigants who cannot afford representation. They gain experience of being on their feet in court, and the litigants gain the advantage of having the representation of a fully qualified lawyer. We also have something called the Personal Support Unit. It's a scheme run and staffed by volunteers. They do not give legal advice, but rather they help by explaining the process to litigants. They help them to think about what they want to say and write it down in a logical order. They help them sort out their papers, provide a pen and paper if necessary, help them with reading documents if English isn't their first language or if they can't read the documents. And they sit beside them in court, not to speak for them, but simply there as moral support. Now, one area which might be of interest here, which I learned about at a Society of Legal Scholars event at Queen Mary University in London, is the introduction as part of the course for law undergraduates of something called clinical training. It's obvious for medics. We expect medical students to be trained in dealing with patients. We expect them to be given that clinical training as part of their graduate training. Why is it not the same for lawyers? We wouldn't let a doctor loose on the public, but we let lawyers loose on the public every day. The benefits of that training are obvious. The work of the judges is made much easier by having litigants who are represented, or at least who have had the benefit of legal advice. Law students have the advantage of learning the skills they will need as practicing lawyers in the safety of a university. Lecturers have the advantage of learning and passing on new skills. The universities have the advantage of adding an additional practical course, which will improve their standing. The cost of setting up a course is measured in time, not in money, and the benefits are obvious. Most importantly, the scope of paralegal work is extended and can offer greater help and assistance to members of the community. In the UK, such law clinics across the country now provide an invaluable service, offering supervised legal advice in many areas of law. They focus on areas such as labour law, debt, housing, family, areas where the most vulnerable members of society tend to need legal advice. The work already carried out by the profession, in combination with those volunteers in the personal support unit and the work of the law clinics, is all work that is firmly rooted in ideas of charity and community. The shared principles of charity and community that underpin the work that the legal profession does, that you in particular do, is part of a wider shared endeavour. That is one that all members of society have a stake in, and that, as I said at the outset of my speech, is the commitment to the rule of law. If ignorance is the greatest threat to the rule of law, then the greatest support for it is the work that we can all do to ensure that the public, that society as a whole, understands its importance. That the public sees the practical demonstration of the work we do in our community for our community. For without that access to justice, the shared endeavour of building a just society is almost impossible. In times of need, we all need to turn and rely upon the kindness of strangers. In a society committed to the rule of law, built on the principles and the values we share, there ought to be no strangers. We are all and should be partners, a community committed to delivering justice. I look forward, inshallah, to watching the continued success of AGHS as a community within a community, committed to delivering justice and to helping our neediest neighbours. Thank you.
Thank you.